Madonna. Simply saying the word aloud makes me feel powerful, even in voiceover. How I have worshipped her ever since I was a little girl. Sorry, Angie Jolie, Catherine the Great. Madonna is the most powerful woman to ever walk the face of the earth. And I have to say that I don't even care a lot about Angelina Jolie or Catherine the Great, but I had to quote Sue Sylvester at the beginning of this episode. I just had to. Hi, welcome back to Judas of Disturbia. I am Raf, and this episode is part 3, the last part of my Madonna's first Rolling Stone cover special episode, in which I am basically talking about the first time Madonna was on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. So basically, let's go back again to November 22, 1984, almost 39 years ago, and let's keep exploring and dissecting in a small, easy to digest chapters the interview that Madonna gave to Chris Connelly at a French restaurant named Evelyn's at New York's East Village, and that ended up being the first of over 20 times the Queen of Pop has been on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine so far. I already talked about the picture by Steven Meisel, Madonna's family's influence on her take on eroticism, her days at the University of Michigan being the rebel she has always been, some of the people she crossed paths with before making it big, like Steve Bray and the Gilroy brothers, her first years in New York, her days in Paris being a part of the tour of Patrick Hernandez, and many other things she talked about in this interview. And it is time to keep going with this conversation. But first, I need to mention a name. That name is Christopher Flynn. He is the ballet teacher I talked about in the first episode of this series, the one who took Madonna to her first gay bar in Detroit. I talk about him without knowing his name. Then I found through TikTok, because yes, I came back to TikTok. You should follow me there actually. The link is on the description of this episode. Thanks in advance for that. I came back to TikTok and I found a video of Madonna talking about this man in her speech of 2019 at the 30th GLAAD Media Awards ceremony, where she was accepting the Advocate for Change award from the world's largest lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer media advocacy organization, originally founded as the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation in 1985. These are some of Madonna's words that time. Why have I always fought for change? That's a hard question to answer. It's like trying to explain the importance of breathing or the need to love. Growing up, I always felt like an outsider, like I didn't fit in. It wasn't because I didn't shave under my armpits. I just didn't fit in, okay? The first gay man I ever met was named Christopher Flynn. He was my ballet teacher in high school. And he was the first person that believed in me, that made me feel special as a dancer, as an artist, and as a human being. I know this sounds trivial and superficial, but he was the first man to tell me I was beautiful. He took me to my first gay club in downtown Detroit. I told my dad I was having a sleepover at a girlfriend's house. Yeah, that got me grounded for the rest of the summer, but that evening changed my life. For the first time, I saw men kissing men, girls dressed like boys, boys wearing hot pants, insane, incredible dancing, and a kind of freedom and joy and happiness that I had never seen before. I finally felt like I was not alone, that it was okay to be different and not to be like everybody else. And that after all, I was not a freak. I felt at home, and it gave me hope. Christopher was the one who pushed me to get the hell out of Rochester, Michigan. No offense, Rochester. Hurry and go to New York and follow my dreams, and that's exactly what I did. It is pretty interesting how Madonna has been such an important link between the LGBTQ plus community of those days. And many of us, the ones of today, I feel like she has given many of us the same hope and freedom that those guys back in the 70s wearing hot pants in a gay bar in Detroit gave her. This is a real life fantasy, like a chain of hope and freedom and happiness and support and pride that we have to protect and that we can't let anyone break. I will leave a link to a video of this whole speech in the description so you can go and watch it after you finish this episode. It is a pretty heartfelt, inspiring and hopeful speech in which she talks about advocacy, about her own advocacy through the years, about the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s, the friends she lost to it, the consequences of caring and advocating for people in need, and about the importance of hope, respect, and freedom. She also talks about her roommate, her friend Kid Haring, and also Christopher, her ballet teacher, also dying of AIDS during those times. I will also link another video in the description, which is a clip where Christopher is talking about her for a Madonna Behind the American Dream 1990 episode on a British documentary series named Omnibus. In this clip, you can also see a pretty young Madonna dancing some type of modern/contemporary dance at a studio, and he is describing her in a very sweet way. Please go and watch it after you listen to this episode, and thanks to everyone posting those beautiful videos. I want to dedicate all this series to Christopher Flynn's energy. Thanks to you too. Bless your soul. Before starting on the topic of this episode, I want to remind you to add my podcast to your favorite ones, share it, comment, leave me 5 stars. Follow me on all my social media platforms. All the handles are in the description. And guess what? I finally created the YouTube channel for this podcast, and the first video will be published today. So please go and follow me there, share the video, like it, comment. I will really appreciate that. The link is on the description as well. Last episode, we ended up with Madonna going back from Paris to the abandoned synagogue that Dan Gilroy, who she was dating back then, you know, the guy with the letters to Paris that we were talking about in the previous episode. And that was teaching her how to play guitar. And his brother Ed Gilroy were renting in Corona, in Queens. And this episode, we will start exactly there, in Queens. So I hope you have some eggs in your mouth while listening to this episode, because we're starting with Chapter 13, The Breakfast Club. After coming back from France, Madonna spent around a year with the Gilroy brothers in Queens. She considered this time her intense musical training, in her own words. She was basically learning from the brothers how to play different musical instruments all the time. Remember, she was deeply trained in classical dance, but now she wanted to sing and play the guitar, be a more complete performer. Dancer, singer, musician, actress, songwriter. So she knew she needed to learn a lot, and this abandoned synagogue was the place to learn for her. She felt loved in there, especially and obviously by Dan. In these days, she started writing her own songs too. Maybe she got this idea when she was in Paris and they compared her to Edith Piaf, who used to write many of her own songs. Or maybe putting her own words into songs was the right way, or the only way, for a woman with the stories Madonna wanted to tell and the ideas she had and still has to actually be able to convey her very important message without anyone being able to actually manipulate her into silence, no matter how hard they could try. But like I said, she felt love and very happy in Queens, and she describes these days almost like a fantasy. Everything was sweet. Dan was very sweet. She says she remembers sometimes when she would write a sad song, sing it to him, and he would end up crying. One thing I have to say is that even though Madonna was practically always at the synagogue, she didn't officially live there. She actually asked Dan if she could stay there living. And he said they had to ask it. And Madonna was flabbergasted. She couldn't understand how, if Dan was also paying rent. And obviously there was a space for her. He wasn't able to make that decision on his own. I think that maybe he had that conversation with Ed already, but the brother was never that fine with Madonna. However, that personality of Dan is not the personality of a man that is going to be with a woman with the personality of Madonna. She's a leader, not a we have to ask my brother kind of girl. But the rest was fine. She was learning. Ed wasn't such a fan of Madonna yet. At least at this time, he wasn't such a fan of her living with them. But he was okay with being in a band with her. And the dynamic seemed to be cordial and nurturing. They actually started a band that has gone through many lineups and that has been current for years. In fact, last year in 2022, they released a single. And at some point, they had a number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart with their 1987 hit single Right on Track, years after Miss Ciccone had left the band and was already a successful solo artist. In that first lineup, as I understand that the lineup that started at the synagogue in Queens was the first lineup, the members were the brothers Dan and Ed Gilroy, then Madonna was the drummer, and Angie Smith, a girl that Madonna had met years before when they were both dancers in the bass. With Madonna as a member of this band, they were rehearsing every day without excuses. Remember, this girl had it very clear. She wanted to succeed, so she was working hard. Quick note here, at some point, even Steve Bray, the waiter from the Blue Frog, turned Madonna's boyfriend, turned Grammy winner, who changed Madonna's life, was also a part of one of these Breakfast Club lineups. But we will talk about that later. Going back to the brothers, they had spent years learning instruments and they were good musicians, but we know that that is not what makes you a star. Madonna had something they didn't have though, nerve. She had a kind of determination they didn't even know existed. And they knew they needed her for that. Maybe that's the real reason why Ed was fine with her in the band and with his brother. Dan says about this, I quote, "She would be up in the morning, a quick cup of coffee, then right to the phones calling up everybody, everyone from local record dealer Blicker Bobs to potential management, anything and everything," end quote. So you see, Madonna was not only a creative, talented, hardworking girl, she was also a businesswoman already. I wish I was brave enough and confident enough in my talent to call a podcast producer or a book editor and say, "Hey, look at my work. I'm good. I'm great. Produce my podcast. Or sign me for a book. I'm worth it." I'm not there yet with my self-confidence, I guess. Let's listen to Madonna herself put these times into words. Quote, "I was just a lot more goal-oriented and commercial-minded than they were. I just took over in the sense that I said, 'What do you know? Teach it to me.' I took advantage of the situation. I wanted to know everything they knew because I knew I could make it work to my benefit." End quote. After this quote, Chris Connelly asked the reader, quote, "Cold words?" And he replies himself, "Perhaps," end quote. I think the benefit was mutual. They learned a lot from her too and got inspired by her determination, I guess, and they saw where that attitude took her. And maybe that is one of the reasons why they also succeed at some point with the band. Let's go back to Madonna's words. Quote, "Immediately when I started working with them, I started thinking record deals, making records and doing shows and stuff like that. And of course, most of the people you have to deal with are men. And I think I just was naturally more charming to these horny old businessmen than Dan and Ed Gilroy. Dan Gilroy had created a monster. I was always thinking in my mind, I want to be a singer in this group too. And they didn't need another singer." End quote. Madonna was not going to stay in the back cover behind the drums. We know that. She wanted to sing, and Ed Gilroy wanted to keep her on the drums. Dan ended up in the middle of his girlfriend and his brother, who didn't want the future Queen of Pop to sing on the band. I guess Dan didn't have the determination Madonna and even his brother Ed had, and Madonna ended up leaving Dan, the band, the synagogue, the drums, and Queens, and she went back to Manhattan. If she was not going to get a chance to be a singer on the Breakfast Club band, she was going to get that chance for herself somewhere else. She was decided she was going to be a singer, not a drummer or only a dancer. Her personality is too big. She is the front woman, not a member of a band. Dan says that he always knew that that type of determination was going to take that girl somewhere. The universe was going to conspire for her to succeed. Chris Connelly asked him if he thought she was more talented than them. And in his own words, he said, quote, "No, she didn't strike me as, well, she was fun, you know. She would be working at this design thing that I was doing, and she would kind of break into dance in the middle of the day. An incredible attention getter. So that's got to tell you something," end quote. Yeah, when it comes to Madonna, there is always a tendency on people, especially people who think they deserve more than she does, to struggle to recognize that apart from hard work, ambition, beauty, and determination, she has talent also. Because you do not become the Queen of Pop without talent. You don't get to that level only because you work hard. Period. However, he left clear that he wasn't happy when she left. He says he actually missed her very much and that it was sad to see her go in the middle of so much tension with his brother Ed. Then he starts saying how, while with him, she almost never had to have a job. She had the whole day to learn, rehearse, make her calls to producers, etc. And he was working. So he's basically saying, as I understand, that he was not only teaching her all his skills for free, but he was also supporting her economically. And then she left him with nothing. Well, no, you learned from her too. As I said before, that's what I think. Then he says that this year with her was actually very fun, that she was a great bonus on a time where he was working and rehearsing at the same time, and then he was joking about palimony. At the end, they were part of each other's life. They both benefited from this year together in different ways. That's about it, I guess. Chapter 14, New Wave. The first thing Madonna did when she got back to Manhattan was to start forming another band, in which she was obviously going to be the singer and front woman, not the drummer in the back. So she needed a good drummer. And I don't know how Steve Bray, Jess, her ex from Michigan, found out about this. And as I understand, it was him who called her saying she had the drummer she needed. He was taking that spot if she wanted him to, because this was his chance to move to New York to make it big. So he became a member of the new band. In the words of Madonna, quote, "He was a lifesaver. I wasn't a good enough musician to be screaming at the band about how badly they were playing," end quote. This doesn't sound very Madonna if you ask me, but people evolve. And we saw the whole opposite of this attitude years later when she opened the doors to her backstage in the documentary Madonna, Truth or Dare from 1991, of which I have already made episodes about in this podcast. In 1979, a garment center building in New York had been transformed into 12 floors of rehearsal rooms. It was and is still called the Music Building, and I think you can still rent those rooms. Many bands of the post-New Wave scene were renting those spaces back then. Bands like Nervus Rex, The Dance, and The System. Madonna and the new band moved into one of these spaces. They moved their equipment and also themselves. Madonna did feel affection for some of the members of those bands, but she also thought most of them were very lazy. I mean, if you think of her hardworking and dedicated, rehearse all day, everyday persona, of course, a lot of people will look lazy to her. So she thought not many of them were going to get out of that building with any success. This characteristic of her personality didn't make her the most popular person in there. She would annoy people in there. To her, the goal was to get out of that building after her band became a successful band. About this, Steve Bray says, quote, "I think there was a lot of resentment of someone who is obviously got that special something. There are so many musicians out there, but there are only a few who really have that charisma. The community out there kind of, I think, frown on her about that. She had trouble making friends," end quote. And it is obvious it happens everywhere. You can buy and learn and excel at many things if you do things right, but charisma is something you can learn or buy, and Madonna has it. I don't think I have it. I think most people tend to dislike me. Kidding. Or not. In that building, there were many people who were there to hang out, to play music, have fun, and get good enough to play music in there with their friends, drinking beer, maybe get a gig at some bar, nothing more than that. But for Madonna, that wasn't the case at all. She wanted stardom. She wanted to be worldwide recognized. She wanted #1 hits, awards, fame, albums, tours, not only a few gigs at some bars. According to Steve Bray, back then that place felt like living in a commune with very close-minded people. And of course, these dreams of success and freedom that Madonna had weren't well received by most of these people. So as I said before, she wasn't the most popular girl in there, but she didn't care, of course. The name of this band was The Millionaires at first. Then they changed it to Mother Dance. Not a great name for a band if you ask me, but then they ended up calling the band Emmy, which was the nickname that Madonna's ex from Queens, Dan Gilroy, had given her. I think the actual name of the band was Emmy and the Emmys. She wanted to call the band Madonna, maybe as her first attempt to go as a solo artist while still being on a band. But according to her, Steve Bray thought that was a disgusting name for a band. Sweet. I guess she listened to him though. About Madonna, the band, and the music itself, he says, quote, "She was playing really raucous rock and roll, really influenced by the Pretenders and the Police. She used to really belt. If we had found that right guitar player, I think that's when things would have taken off. But there are so many horrible guitar players in New York, and we seem to get them all." End quote. So blame it on the guitar player, Steve. No, I'm kidding. I guess he was right. You can actually listen to several recordings of this band on YouTube before they split. Because yes, of course, they split. They had no time and no money. They needed to succeed like a year before that time. And even though they were in the circuit, they had no real success in sight. So that was it for Emmy and the Emmys, the band. Chapter 15, Rocking at the Upper West Side. Pretty quick after that, a manager listened to a demo they had recorded. It was an early version of Burning Up, and you know that is pretty possibly my favorite song of Madonna's debut album. That manager liked this song enough to sign Madonna, and she got several things from this contract. First, she was taken out of the music building and moved to a spacious place in the Upper West Side in New York. Second, she got a salary, so at least money problems were getting kind of under control at this time. And third, she got a new band on the circuit again, with a better guitarist and better conditions to rehearse, I guess. Madonna was quick and smart enough to bring Steve Bray on this new band with her, because she believes in his skills for music. But no matter what he thought, she used this power she had with this manager now to call her new band the way she always wanted to call her band, Madonna. However, for this new band, she had a different vision for the music. She was smart enough to see that the music people was listening to was changing, and she started to write all the new songs for this band for this new sound. As Chris Connelly put it himself, quote, "It was the heyday of urban contemporary radio in New York, and Madonna was captivated by the funky sounds emanated from boomboxes all over town," end quote. However, there was a problem. This contract she has signed was for playing rock, as she was before with Emmy and the Emmys. The manager didn't believe in this music she was making now. In fact, he hated it. But she didn't feel rock was the right music to play at this time for the kind of stardom she wanted. She didn't believe in this project. So they started having arguments and fights all the time. Madonna, the manager, the band, everyone. You can imagine that was hell in the Upper West Side. So in those times, she would rehearse with the band and the manager, the rock music. Then she would stay with Steve and rehearse and record the funkier stuff they were working on. So they were working on two projects at the same time. I guess one project was financing the other, the real one, to say it in a way. I don't know how this went legally, but even though this was hard, because after so much work and struggle, she had been finally signed by this manager, she ended up breaking the contract because that wasn't the right project for her. And she preferred to start from zero. Pretty brave. And I think that was pretty smart and the right decision at the time. You should not compromise for something you don't really believe in. In my own life, I am trying to avoid that. Chapter 16, Sire Records. She left and she took her partner in crime, Steve Bray, with her. It's kind of funny how I always call him by his name and last name, but I feel that if I say Steve, it could be any Steve. So she took the future Grammy winner, Steve Bray, with her. During the day, they would write songs, rehearse, make funky music together. At night, she would go to all the popular nightclubs. The Roxy, Danceteria, it was fun for her. At the end of the day, she was still the same ballerina girl who loves to dance at the clubs. But she was in a different mood now, in a business mood. She was marketing her own music. She would work the crowd, make herself notice, then get to the DJ's booth, dance with the DJ, and most importantly, put a record with her music on the hand of this person. Mark Cummings, an American record producer, remixer, and disc jockey famous for his role in the New York club scene, was the DJ at Danceteria back then. And he knew Madonna. She was one of the regular dancers that would go there every Saturday. He knew that as many of those regulars, Madonna wanted something else from him. She wanted him to play her music. She was ambitious as many of these people, but he saw something special in her. They would flirt with each other, and at some point they started dating. She gave him a pretty good funk demo she had put together with Steve Bray. It had 4 tracks, including a song you may know called Everybody, that would become one of the singles on her debut album. Mark Cummings, that as I just mentioned, she was dating at the time, listened to the 4 tracks and liked the whole thing. He decided to test the best song, Everybody, by playing it at Danceteria. And the result was that people liked it. They danced to it. So he took Madonna to the studio and made her record the song all over again to make it even better according to his knowledge. He produced it this time. He took the song to Sire Records and instantly got a deal for Madonna. She was signed again and it was even better now. This would be the second signing of Madonna that we're talking about in this series and in this episode. Madonna was happy and Steve Bray was also very happy because he was going to finally have the chance to produce a real recording artist, a full album, Madonna's debut album. After all, he was her partner in crime. What he didn't know was that the deal that Madonna had made with Mark Cummings was that in exchange for him producing the song, taking it to Sire Records, and getting her the deal for the album, he was getting the role of producer of this album. They had already talked with Warner Brothers, the parent company of Sire Records, and they were all okay with Cummings producing Madonna's debut album. However, Cummings was about to get his heart broken too, at the same time as Steve Bray. Mark Cummings was not going to produce it either. Reggie Lucas, a guitarist, songwriter, and record producer who had produced singer Stephanie Mills before, was going to produce the album that was primarily recorded at Sigma Sound Studios in New York City. About Steve Bray, Madonna said, quote, "I was really scared. I thought I had been given a golden egg. In my mind, I thought, okay, Mark can produce the album and Steve can play the instruments," end quote. But we know Steve Bray wanted to produce the whole thing. So that was not going to work. Let's keep going with her works. Quote, "It was really awful, but I just didn't trust him enough. Steve didn't believe in the ethics of the situation," end quote. They actually didn't end up well this time. Steve was very hurt. It was pretty hard for him to accept what had happened. About Cummings, Madonna didn't think he was ready for the whole album either. And you know she wanted the album to be the best, and to produce the best album, you need the best and the most experienced producer you can get at the time. In Cummings' own words, which he said in a way that made obvious how upset he was, quote, "Sure, I was hurt, but I still had a royalty coming from the record," end quote. After the end of the contract with the previous manager, being signed with Sire Records and breaking her relationship with Steve Bray, Madonna kept performing on the circuit, but not as a band now. She was Madonna already, a solo artist, and this is before recording the debut album or during the time she was working on it. Without a band to play the music, she would sing to backing tracks or lip sync to the music. And she kept going with her sexy dancing on stage, which years later became a trademark for her. In one of these performances, Reggie Lucas, who was already set to produce the album, went to see her for the first time. He needed to see her on stage. He was going to produce her debut album, but he had no idea who Madonna was or what she was about. About this first record, Reggie Lucas said, quote, "I wanted to push her in a pop direction. She was a little more oriented toward the disco thing, but I thought she had appeal to a general market." It's funny about that thing with Cummings. The same thing that happened to him pretty much happened to me on her second record when they had Nile Rodgers. End quote. So another producer with a broken heart. But as I said before, Madonna will always reach for the best available to produce the best music. He was right though. Pop was the right way to go with her. She was the then future queen of pop. Either way, she has the freedom and braveness enough to do what she did many years later in 2005 when she released her 10th studio album, Confessions on a Dance Floor, which, like I have said before, is conceptually very much a disco album on an era in which disco was just a memory. The debut album was named as her, Madonna, and the first single was Holiday. It wasn't an immediate success, but Madonna was not going to give up or take just the negative results. That is not the way you succeed. She took the positive and she trusted that one day, hopefully soon, Warner Brothers and everyone in general were going to see how good this album is, which it actually is still now, and they were going to take the album to where it deserved to be. To make it succeed, basically, which actually ended up happening sometime later. One of the ways Madonna made people listen to her music was using the music videos to market the music, the way it should be. She took the attention of the people to her music through the music videos in which she mixed all her classical dance training, all that ballet, with her edgy side and her smart observation of the society of that time. She did what many had and have tried without a positive result: use her freedom and her control over her own sexuality to promote her music. But why did it work for her and not for others? This is how she replied to this question. Quote, "I think that has to do with them not being in touch with that aspect of their personality. They say, well, I have to do a video now, and a pop star has to come on sexually. So how do I do that? instead of being in touch with that part of their self to begin with, end quote. Chapter 17, Jellybean Benitez. John Benitez, aka Jellybean, is an American musician, songwriter, DJ, remixer, and music producer who has produced and remixed artists such as Madonna herself, also Whitney Houston, Michael Jackson, and the Pointer Sisters. So huge names here. He has also been a producer of Studio 54 Radio, and he is considered one of the most successful dance artists of all time. When Madonna gave Chris Connelly this interview that became her first time on the cover of Rolling Stone, she was dating Jellybean, and they talk a bit about him on this interview. And she actually considered him her most stable relationship so far, I guess. At this time, they were together for around 1 year already. They had met when Madonna was dancing and promoting her music at a disco called The Funhouse, where Jellybean had earned his reputation. However, I don't know what reputation Chris is referring to be honest. Let me know in the comments if you know, because I don't know a lot about Jellybean. Chris asked her why she felt this relationship was so stable, and she told him she was not going to try to fool him. She said Jellybean and her had their ups and downs as in any relationship, but that with him things felt so serious that she actually took the guy to meet her parents, meeting Mr. Silvio Ciccone and Jean, her stepmother. The relationship felt safe to both Madonna and the guy. She thought that what actually made them connect to each other was their ambition. She felt this guy was just like her. Jellybean said, quote, "We both started to move at the same pace. My career has exploded within the industry and hers has exploded on a consumer basis. We are both very career-oriented, very goal-oriented." End quote. That actually makes a lot of sense if we take in consideration what Madonna said before in this interview about guys not understanding or supporting her determination to succeed professionally. Chapter 18, Exploitation or Resentment. At the end of the interview, Chris starts by describing the presence of Madonna at Evelyn's. He explains how she knows many people. She knows the New York scene at this point. Maybe she even gossiped about a couple of them while at this place. At the same time, this Madonna that had only released one album at the time still had the privilege to be somewhat unnoticed by people that totally knew who she was, but only because she had spent a long time in there already. She was a New Yorker now in a way, and people knew her before being Madonna, the star. Some may even feel resentment that she was having such type of success. However, Chris said that in a way he felt that because at the time he interviewed her, she hadn't left New York a lot yet. After the success of her first album, she hadn't toured yet and she hadn't performed live in a long time. She actually didn't have yet a realistic idea of how famous she was at the time. This girl was still able to count with one hand the times she had been approached by fans. But this would not be the case if she left NYC. Outside of New York, she was a phenomenon, but because all of this happened before social media, she hadn't seen it. She was very influential socially already, and people around the world were dressing as her, with their bellies exposed, riding their hair just as she did, and wearing the rosaries just as she did. Chris Connelly talks about clones of Madonna everywhere. They took a cab together to go to Danceteria, one of the clubs she would visit the most when she was in that neighborhood, and where she met Mark Cummings. Madonna told Chris how she felt she was going back to her high school. At the end of the day, a nightclub can be a high school in many ways, not only if you want to succeed in music. When they got to the club, she was met by people excessively cordial with her, asking her what she was doing back in there, admiration in general. People was happy she was there, but nothing crazy. There was no weird gawking, no one was approaching her in a way that made her uncomfortable uncomfortable and no one was asking her for autographs. She even kissed a few fashionable people on the mouth, then she wiped her lips and told Chris how you need to be careful who you kiss on the mouth, which may be seen as such a bad thing to say after kissing someone on the mouth, especially by Madonna, who so many people love to judge and criticize, but was she wrong? I don't know. You let me know what you think. When getting there, artist Kit Haring, her dear friend, who at some point will have his own episode in this podcast, was also waiting for her at Danceteria, and they shared a big hug. Chris ends the interview by asking some of the characters the same question. Did Madonna exploited people to get to where she was at that time in 1984? Dan Gilroy, who taught her how to play several instruments at the synagogue in Queens, says, quote, I think that a lot of people do feel exploited by her, but then again, everyone's got so many expectations about their relationship with her. She's very intense immediately with somebody, very friendly. Perhaps people feel this is what our relationship is about. And then, if there is any cooling of that, it's taken to be rejection. End quote. I agree. If you give something to someone expecting something that is not under contract, first, that is not very sincere from you either. And if you get your heart broken after that, protect your own heart better the next time. Don't expect anything from anyone but yourself. And if you feel rejected, the relationship wasn't the best for you. Also, was this guy talking about his brother? Mark Cummings' version of Everybody, the ones he produced when he took Madonna to the studio and got her signed with Sire Records, made it to the debut album and it was a hit. So he has got great money in royalties because of that song, and according to him, it also gave him a great positive effect on his career. So maybe he was still unhappy because he didn't produce the full album as the deal was, but at the end, the effect of Madonna in his life and career was actually very positive. Reggie Lucas also got very beneficiated by producing such a successful album, even though he did not produce Like a Virgin, the second album. He was full of projects and people interested in him producing them for what he did for Madonna. Dan and Ed Gilroy ended up finding a great new drummer to replace Madonna on the Breakfast Club band, just none other than Steve Bray, after he ended up fighting with Madonna when she told him that he was not going to produce her debut album. This is almost a movie. At the end, two of Madonna's exes ended up on that band that she was a part of before. At the time of this interview, they were working on their first album, which I think was named Rico Mambo, and was released in 1984. Steve Bray and Madonna ended up fixing their relationship because it was too old and they admired each other so much, believed in each other so much, and they worked so well together for so long that they decided not to let this situation break the whole thing. He also has royalties from the first album because he shares writing credits with Madonna in 4 of the songs. I honestly don't know what their relationship is like today. You let me know what you know. And to the last question Chris Connelly asked him, Steve Bray replied, quote, exploited? People say that. But that's resentment of someone who's got the drive. It seems like you're leaving people behind or you're stepping on them. And the fact is that you're moving and they are not. She doesn't try to be that polite. She doesn't care if she ruffles someone's feathers. End quote. He gets her. And he is right. You have to keep moving. Forget if others are moving or not. Focus on yourself and your own movement, your career, and your success. I think that is what took Madonna to where she got, or at least one of the most important factors. She was always focused on herself. It would be so interesting to listen to some of the conversations the Gilroy brothers and Steve Bray had about Madonna back then when recording the first Breakfast Club album. Chris ends the interview asking Madonna what she thinks about what Steve Bray said. She smiled and said, "C'est vrai," And because my French is not so good at all, and you may not understand my pronunciation, I'll translate. She said, it's true. And you know what, people? This is it. In these last 3 episodes, I basically talked about everything Madonna and Chris Connelly talked about in this legendary interview that ended up being the first time Madonna was on the cover of the iconic Rolling Stone magazine. What a fantasy! Isn't it just so much fun to explore the life of people as interesting as Madonna is? I love this. I hope you did too. If you were here waiting for me to tell you what my rituals to worship Madonna are, they are basically listening to her music and watching her music videos and videos of her live performances, which doesn't happen daily, I think, because I am not that obsessed, but at least 4 times a week, and also talking about her on my podcast as I am right now. If you got all the way here listening to me talking about her, you are an icon yourself. I have nothing else to say about her, but I am a fan of Madonna because her music is great, because she is fascinating, and because the general concept of her public and artistic persona inspire me to proudly feel and embrace my own freedom to exist the way I am. Again, thank you, Madonna. It is such a pleasure to explore your legendary life and career from your own point of view. But before ending this series, I want to remind you to add my podcast to your favorite ones, share it, comment, leave me 5 stars, follow me on all my social media platforms. All the handles are in the description. The first YouTube video will be published today. It is about Joan Rivers, another icon, and it starts with a very, very, very dirty joke. So please go follow me there, share it, like it, comment. I will really appreciate that. I will end up this episode with a question for you. Do you think Madonna achieved the vision she had for her future life and career when she gave this interview to Rolling Stone magazine? And that is it for today. Thanks for listening and come back for the next episode, which will probably not be about Madonna. Bye!